Hello everyone, I am George and we will be talking about the efficacy of video game preservation. So what happened? In our story, Jack right here, a fan of video games, takes the ROMs from his old game cartridges and uploads them online for free for others to download. By the way, if you don't know what ROMs mean is basically the file that represents the whole game. So this Zelda cartridge would contain one ROM for said game. In response to this, Games Inc., who is the publisher of the games Jack uploaded online, files a takedown notice for the ROMs to be removed immediately. To add some more insight into the story, in Games Inc.'s takedown notice, they state how Jack should know that his actions are considered piracy and copyright infringement. Furthermore, they mention how Jack could end up paying thousands of dollars in damages for hosting their games without their permission. So they insist Jack to remove the games from the website to prevent them from taking any further legal action. So who will be ethically testing? Although we could test Games.Inc. on the efficacy of removing old games from Jack's website, we will instead focus on Jack because it's easier to measure the acts of a single individual rather than a large corporation that probably abides by its own rules. To start this test, we can ask ourselves a few important questions like, so should Jack have uploaded the games online or not? Why did he upload the games in the first place? And what was his motivation? Now we will look into Jack's motivation. Jack uploaded the games online because the games were very old and Games Inc. had not been producing any new copies for many decades. This is a problem for multiple reasons. First is due to the old games being a physical media that are vulnerable to breaking over time. That could be because of exposure to the elements being dropped, the batteries in the cartridge dying out, or even water damage. This is a problem for old games because game publishers like Games Inc. do not produce any new copies a few years after the game's release. So what can end up happening is that every copy of a game will eventually become unusable, making it impossible for the game to be played again. Jack saw this problem, so he took it upon himself to ensure that the games weren't forever lost by uploading them online for others to play for a long time. Furthermore, Jack saw yet another problem. The prices of the games he wanted to upload online had risen dramatically ever since he bought the game due to resellers and scalpers. So if anyone wanted to play the games right now, they would have to pay hundreds of dollars for a game that was only $60 25 years ago. So by putting the game ROM online, people wouldn't have to fork over way too much money to resellers who wouldn't even give the money they earned to the publisher. To judge Jack's actions, we will be using the ACM Code of Ethics. Now, the ACM Code of Ethics is quite expansive and covers many more topics than what I'll be addressing here, so we'll keep our discussion to specifically section 1.1 and 1.5, but what do these sections even mean? 1.1 states, contribute to society and to human well-being, acknowledging that all people are stakeholders in computing. For this section, what we want to focus on is the first part about contributing to human well-being. We had to make sure that Jack's actions actually benefited someone or a group of people. So had Jack robbed a video game store and took some old video games, then that wouldn't be very ethical because he had harmed the employees and other customers in the store. In other words, actively harming human well-being. Now on to section 1.5, which states respect the work required to produce new ideas, inventions, creative works, and computing artifacts. This section simply says not to commit plagiarism or to steal the work/ideas of other people and other groups. With these two sections, we can see if Jack's actions were ethical or not. However, Jack's actions aren't entirely clean. By uploading the games onto the internet, Jack violated section 1.5. His actions violate the copyright of Games.Inc. and their distributing rights. Jack never asked Games Inc. for permission if he could upload the games onto his website for free, so Jack would not be respecting the intellectual rights of Games Inc. Additionally, Jack opens the gate for piracy because any random person can download and play the games for free, even if they didn't originally own the game. Now on to our test. Using section 1.1, we find that Jack's actions are indeed ethical. By him putting games that are threatened with extinction online, he ensures that video game history is preserved. To put out an example, let's say that the White House was burning down and Jack ran into the building and saved the Constitution and Declaration of Independence from being engulfed in flame. I think we can agree that doing something like that is pretty dumb, but it's also quite ethical, because those two documents hold such a high historical relevance to us. By saving those two documents, Jack would have preserved the history of our nation, and we can apply that same type of thinking into video games. His actions prevent the games from being unattainable in the case that Games Inc. does not produce any more copies of their old titles. Another lens we can see Jack's actions is that by having the games online for free, it allows people to enjoy video games who otherwise wouldn't have the money to afford them to be able to play them. This benefits the well-being of poor people who can't buy video games. Jack's actions also benefit those who would have ended up paying too much money for these old games, since they now have the option of downloading them for free instead of giving scalpers money they probably didn't deserve. So his actions would be ethical under Section 1.1. In conclusion, Jack's actions are ultimately ethical because his actions benefit the well-being of people who can't afford video games and preserving video game history. But ironically, although I did put a not guilty image here, his actions would still be illegal under the eyes of the law, and Games Inc. could legally charge him for copyright infringement. But at the end of the day, it's important to distinguish that ethics are not one and the same with the law. Just because something is illegal doesn't mean that it's unethical, and just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's ethical. Jack's actions may violate Games Inc.'s copyright and trademarks, but his actions remain ethical because copyright and such do not strictly define ethical code. And that concludes our test on the efficacy of video game preservation. I want to thank you for watching, and please don't forget to smash that like button, comment, and subscribe.